As stated, there has been a 50% increase in cannabis-induced psychosis alone. And that accounts for people just using cannabis and having no other substances in their system at that time. Now let's talk about the second part of this equation. Remember, the first part was about the flower aspect of THC. Now let's turn it up a few notches, and we're going to be talking about primarily THC edibles and even concentrates or oils that are almost 100% THC, completely full of THC, let's just put it that way. Almost 100% compared to the 30% of like the flower, which is on the high end too. So let's jump right on into it. First and foremost, again, I don't want to leave anything out in regards to this, and this is about as well, we're not just going to be talking negatives, but we're going to pertain to the detox and withdrawal, but we're also going to go over some benefits again. Benefits of edibles. In particular, it can help with a lot of neuro concerns. It can also help a lot of times with, as stated, chronic illnesses, cancer, pain management for people who are trying to get off of opiates and opioids in particular. And also for people who have really high pain tolerances, or people who've had even strokes, as I said, cancer, cannabis can be the option, because a lot of these pain meds, unfortunately, like oxycodone, hydrocodone, they don't have the same effect over a long amount of time, and raising those doses are no good for your liver long term. And I'm not hating on those prescriptions or pharmaceuticals. It's just a fact of the matter. So I want to clear that up first. We're not talking about in regards to, we're not saying it's horrible across all aspects. I just think in general, when it comes to the edible portion as well, medicinal, it does have great value. And recreational for people who truly are using it for chronic illness and can't use a medical card. We'll do a video in the future about maybe about medical cards in general, and maybe how to obtain them if it's legal in your state. But that's all we're going to say on that. But I don't want everyone to think I'm completely against cannabis in that way. It does have great value for even, as I said, cancer patients, compared to things such as strong pain medications. Now here we go. So the dangers of a lot of times these edibles, and this once again pointed toward the young getting their hands on them, or even young adults and adults in general. The big thing is, if somebody takes one, first off, they look like regular candy a lot of times. Yes, the bag should be labeled, which is good. It comes from dispensaries in regards to having it labeled. But if you're just leaving edibles out, and this is being obviously not a responsible adult, your child could get their hands on it. An animal could get a piece of it, because once again, it looks a lot of times just like gummies, like in that photo, the outer space. Yeah, you will feel like you're in outer space if you're just taking them recreationally, literally. You'll think you're sinking into a couch and just all sorts of stuff. Let me just put it that way because of the potency of it. But one severe side effect is anxiety and paranoia and those intrusive thoughts of using edibles. This isn't for everyone, once again, but if you're just going into a dispensary and you're going to try an edible, be forewarned, an edible high is nothing like a smoke high. Nothing like it. And same with those dabs. I would say that oil stuff people use is way closer to like smoking flower from 10, 15 years back than edibles. But how your body processes edibles is completely different as well. Once again, when you consume something, it's got to pass through your stomach and liver, where it has that first pass effect. But with it, once it starts going into your bloodstream, the reason why people sometimes get way too stoned on it and potentially could have a psychotic break, it's because they eat a couple more. It sometimes can take up to an hour for them to kick in. But even without that, I've known people or patients who've taken them for, like, let's say, they take a 10 to 20 milligram edible. And remember, there's edibles you can buy out there where they have up to 500 to 1,000 milligrams total. I mean, it's just dangerous. But then they go to another state and buy them. They think it's, it's a different brand of the edible. and they have a psychotic break on it. Because every batch is tested when it comes to edibles, but just your body processes edibles the same way. There's just so many factors that go into it to where if you're going to use edibles, you need to make sure you have something in your stomach beforehand. You need to make sure you're taking all the right precautions. And also driving, for that matter. You should never drive when using cannabis, but in particular, it can be extremely dangerous if you are on an edible driving. It is with cannabis in general, once again, it does affect your mind. It is a mood changing substance. And unfortunately, sometimes people using it, it can cause things such as psychotic breaks, increased paranoia and anxiety, that feeling of having a heart attack. When you smoke regular cannabis, the 30% stuff today, people report a lot of times if they have panic that they feel like their heart's exploding. That's big. But edibles increase that tenfold, plus the paranoia and potentially, I'm not going to say hallucinations, but sometimes people do have hallucinations on them. Also, one thing that has been reported, and this isn't like a 50% increase, but there have been reports of people who have extreme panic on edibles, and they're not in the comfort of their home, where at least if they're in panic, they're at least in a familiar environment, where they're out, not in their home, and then they have these SI or suicidal ideation thoughts on them. So, word of advice, if you're going to be using these kind of things like edibles and whatnot, make sure, and I'm not once again telling you like this, but this would be advice if you are going to use them, make sure you're using them in an environment you're familiar with, preferably your own. You do not want to be in a new environment just because if you're going to be around other people, oh, I'll be social. Some people are, but sometimes it can have that opposite effect to where you just want to go curl up in the fetal position. Also, when it comes to the youth having these, and even high schoolers, impaired brain development again. It's been ruled out pretty much that, for example, that cannabis alone can cause schizophrenia or anything like that. But if you do have, once again, what is excluded a lot of times from these studies isn't talked about, is if you have a predisposition or a history of schizophrenia. So it's not going to cause it on its own, but it can be that catalyst to potentially induce that first psychotic break potentially. So that's why you need to be really careful. It's, once again, a completely different high as well. Now, let's go into the detox part of it. So the detox, first thing, let's just throw this out, there are some people who somehow take like 50 to 100 milligrams a night. And, I've watched the Joey Diaz show where he says he's taking up to 300 to like 1,000 at points. That, don't always believe what you're hearing on there. Don't believe that. Or poor Lee Syed as well, stoned out of his mind. Once again, nothing wrong with it, but don't just think, oh, I'm going to take that much as well. That's just an example. But even somebody just taking like 50 milligrams, let's just say, and you're trying to get off of them. What I would personally recommend with anything, first, instead of trying to go cold turkey, because as stated in the last video we did, check that out, where I'm talking about the just THC withdrawal and detox in general when it comes to the flower or bud, flower, bud, whatever you want to call it, primarily flower. But when it comes to THC, yes, you can cold turkey, you can. But when it comes to being edibles, being a different type of high and feeling a lot more stoned, if you're taking 50 milligrams and you have the option, I would do a taper over a couple weeks on it, because what's going to happen is will lead to that first side effect, which you're not going to really be able to avoid, is having sleep disturbances and insomnia. It's very hard to sleep at first. And the thing is, once your sleep starts coming back after a couple weeks, even sometimes up to a month, you'll start having vivid dreams again, because a lot of times your dreams are really suppressed when you're using cannabis, that when you finally get when you finally go off of it, once you start sleeping, and you're going to have very intense, vivid dreams, or if you are sleeping at first for the first couple weeks a little bit, you're going to notice having intense bouts of dreams. Also, to all the men out there, one thing that's common, in particular off edibles, and you've stopped them, or you've been taking high doses, or you've been taking it for a long amount of time. When you are off of them, one thing that's common is, yes, cannabis can lower your testosterone levels temporarily while you're using them. I'm not saying these dramatic swings, but one thing that can happen to guys is once they get off of it, I know this sounds wild, but they'll start having wet dreams because they've been so suppressed, and they might not even realize it. And also, you have an intense sex drive that comes back at first. A lot of times with younger men up into their 30s, 40s, it's pretty common, and even older men as well, it's common. So you might have that rebound effect of a sex drive. I know that might be kind of uncomfortable for people to talk about, but this is stuff that, once again, from patients and whatnot, that is being reported, and from studies as well. And once again, we talk about all things, kind of uncomfortable topics as well, because it's stuff that's not talked about enough. Also, another withdrawal effect, and we'll go into, once again, how it can help with the detox, but first, some other withdrawal effects. You're going to have for about a month as well that fuzziness feeling, that foggy feeling, where you just kind of feel like there's kind of like a heaviness in your face in front of you. It's that cloudy feeling you have, that dull feeling where you feel like nothing attracts you, or you don't really want to do anything. Also, surprisingly, anxiety and depression can temporarily, and not really anxiety, but your depression can temporarily rise. So if you don't have a history of depression or anxiety, in particular depression, and you notice feeling a little bit more depressed because it's a psychological change in your routine a lot of times from using something, just like anything, you might feel some depression. Suicidal thoughts should not be present, but just having some depressive tendencies, just dull, not wanting to do anything, that's normal. That should subside over after a couple weeks. The key is really for the most intense period, if you've been using edibles in particular for a long amount of time, it's that first 1 to 4 weeks. Younger adults, it will be easier for. Just like anything, your body recovers faster. If you're older adults, it sometimes can take more time, but even with that fact, let's take that fact out, everyone's body and biochemistry is different. Everyone has a different subjective experience. You can't base somebody's withdrawal, and this is off anything. You can't just have one objective protocol, because once again, everyone is different. Now, another thing that's common, nausea. Nausea can be very common. Vomiting, that's not something, that would be more so if you've taken a high dose of edibles, or you're really stoned, and in particular with oils or those dabs and whatnot. Vomiting, projectile vomiting can be very common, and off edibles as well. That's one interesting side effect that's come from edibles, and in particular the oils, is people going into ERs, projectile vomiting, or even into the psych hospital from them. They don't really know yet what is causing it in specific, but it's a side effect that's been on the rise as well, as that projectile vomiting. Muscle spasms and pain as well can happen, more so a stiffness. It can be common, a stiffness. Also, headaches. Headaches also are headaches as well are a very big side effect across the board with THC. And it's those headaches, they're not migraine headaches per se, they're more so some tension headaches, and they go hand in hand with that foggy feeling that you might be feeling. But a conclusion in regards to the withdrawal, typically depending, and this is for all THC products, depending on dose and the longevity of how long you've been using them, anywhere from 1 week to up to, a month and a half. Now, when it comes to physical withdrawals, as we stated, those obviously can happen. But once again, they're more likely with edibles than the flower. But they can happen, once again, to anyone across the board. I've seen a lot more of the psychological withdrawal, of the post-acute a week after, and the mental cravings that are way more common. Like a lot of things, psychological withdrawals. A lot of times people using substances, even cannabis, they have their specific times every day they use cannabis, for example. And you change that routine. Let's say you smoke in the morning, or you eat an edible and you go work out, and then you use it again at X and X time. Psychologically, if you've been doing that for a while, forming a habit, that's just hard to break in general, because your brain is adjusting to that, plus going through the withdrawal from it. Now, let's real quick as well hit on what helps with the detox. And this, I'm specifically going off of what patients have said have been the best things that have helped them. And first and foremost, tapering or cold turkeying, more than likely you will experience some sort of withdrawal. But what has helped all in all with, and I made this list based off what patients have said has helped the most. And the first thing, as always, with any sort of withdrawal or detox, making sure you're staying hydrated. A lot of times when you're using something, if you're using it, and you're not in the right state of mind, a lot of times now with cannabis as well, munchies are a thing, and that's one thing as well. Some people notice they'll lose weight, a little bit of weight as well, because they've had the munchies. That's surprisingly though not as common with the flowers and edibles today with such high THC content, unless you add the CBD, and that's why I didn't really hit on it. But just in general, and that's a lot of times what was happening with a lot of the older strains of weed, of even like 10 years ago was that. But that still can happen. I'm not saying it can't. But hydration, Powerade, water, electrolytes, just because, as stated, it can always help in some way, and it's going to help release and push those toxins through faster. Avoid sodas if you can during this time as well, because once again, the dark sodas or dark carbonated beverages tend to have you hold on to fluids and fats as well. So we'll go there first. Also, trying to stay busy, and I know this is hard, but this is it. When you're trying to form new habits and you're trying to break it, especially with cannabis, sometimes the worst thing you can do is just lay in bed and just wish for it to end. You got to change your setting and environment. A lot of times those psychological withdrawals are very tough for people, and how you start with that, and it's going to be really tough at first. I know, very, very, very tough at first, to where you're just going to be like, I can't do this. But if you start setting those habits early, and this is if you're not having really severe physical withdrawals, start setting those. Try to start getting a little bit of exercise and just start with walking. Also, trying new things if you're with these new habits, or if you're changing your routine. For example, one thing that can really help is if you watched a lot of TV and whatnot, trying to start reading. Reading is really good for your brain in general, and it'll help because a lot of times your memory, your short-term and long-term memory, but in particular your short-term, can be messed up at first, to where if you read, it's going to start helping with your retention, especially if you're starting a new job up soon. Reading is very, very, very helpful. And that's a skill in general that across the board, retention in general is going to help you. And it's going to help form those new neural pathways in your brain, and it also can help reduce anxiety and depression. So if you're not an avid reader, start reading. And even if you're a slow reader, doesn't matter. Your brain, it's a muscle you have to use. And real quick, I already hit on the exercise. Headaches, having some ibuprofen or Tylenol for those at first, very important. Reason being, once again, when you're first going through the detox, a lot of times one of the first things, because you're not sleeping as well, which you're not sleeping as well either, and if you're not sleeping well, you're going to tend to have more headaches. Also, you might not be eating as much and just kind of be that gray feeling, which can be that you can have your blood sugars can be a lot lower. You might have some changes in your blood pressure as well. And also, once again, having not really muscle spasms, but when you're taking this out of your substance, you're taking the substance out of your body, your neural pathways can be just a little off to where it can cause headaches. So just be aware of that, to where you might want to have some ibuprofen or Tylenol on hand. But one big thing, as stated again with edibles, is that I want to make very apparent and clear is it is not, if you've been smoking and you're going to try an edible for the first time out with friends, going somewhere or to the bar, I would not advise doing that your first time there. I would do it at your home, because it is not the same and it's processed differently, and it is a lot more. There can be a hallucinogenic aspect to it. It's not a total hallucinogenic, but it can have that, with that paranoia and anxiety and that feeling of like your heart's going to beat out of your chest. You can start having those intrusive thoughts, to where you can have some of those aspects of thinking you're hallucinating. But that is your daily dose of mental health. Stay safe out there. Once again, I'm not trying to hate on cannabis. It has great uses for people. I'm just kind of concerned with these high-level THC products that are that are available on the recreational side, when on the medical side, they have higher CBD, lower THC strains, where that's what they should be trying to do across the board, in my opinion. But I don't think, for recreational purposes, people should just be able to have these high levels and these oils as well. That is the daily dose of mental health. Like, subscribe, comment if you've ever been through the detox of any oils, edibles, or even flower. But check out the last video about the flower video I did. I know this was a little bit longer, but sometimes it takes me a minute to get my thought out on it. I'll have more content coming out in the next couple days. I don't know what the video is going to be about yet, but it'll be something mental health related or medication related, you name it. Subscribe. Once again, I'm demonetized. YouTube, you can kiss my backside. They'll probably get mad at me for saying it, but whatever. And I'll list my PayPal in general. I mean, once again, it wasn't much that I was even getting paid at all, but it was still a little bit off them throwing some ads here and there on. But yeah, if you want to, I'll list my PayPal. Anything helps, it'll go back into the channel. I'll actually be telling you from now on how it goes, what I'll be using it for to the channel, just so you know. When I get monetized again, we'll have the membership option back available, to where I'll be posting more so on the Patreon and stuff. So I don't have anything on there yet, again, being paused, but I'll have content on there as well. That's it. I'm out.